The desert had a way of swallowing sound, and on that late afternoon, it felt as though even the wind was holding its breath. Caleb Turner guided his mule along the narrow trail, heading back to his homestead before the heat fled and the cold crept in. The sky stretched wide and hazy, stained gold and copper as the sun sagged toward the jagged mountains. It was the kind of evening when a man expected silence, not company. That was why the movement caught his eye. At first it was nothing more than a flicker, something shifting near the base of a twisted mesquite tree about 40 yards off. Caleb slowed, squinting against the glare. A coyote, a wounded deer. Out here everything fought to survive, and most things failed. He considered riding on. A settler alone had to stay cautious, but something tugged at him, a stubborn sense of duty he'd never quite managed to shake. He guided the mule toward the tree. As he drew closer, he realized the shape was too still, too small. A child, lying curled in the dust like a dropped doll. Caleb's heart tightened. The child's dark hair was matted with dirt, his limbs thin as dry sticks. A torn buckskin shirt clung to his frame, and around his neck hung a small carved charm, a weathered eagle, with wings spread upward as if in prayer. The boy's eyelids fluttered when Caleb knelt beside him. "Hey there," Caleb said softly, unsure if the child even understood English. "Can you hear me, son?" The boy tried to lift his head, but only managed a faint shiver. His lips were cracked, his breathing shallow. Caleb uncorked his water flask and held it to the boy's mouth. At first, nothing happened. Then, with sudden desperation, the boy coughed and gulped at the water in ragged, frantic sips. "Easy," Caleb murmured. "Easy now." The boy slumped against him, exhausted by even that small effort. Caleb hesitated. He knew the stories. Settlers finding. Apache children could be mistaken for kidnappers or worse. But leaving the boy here meant death. And Caleb Turner had never been the kind of man who could walk away from a dying child. With careful arms, he lifted the boy, surprised by how feather-light he felt. The child's head rested weakly on his shoulder, eyes barely open. "You're safe now," Caleb whispered, turning his mule toward home as the desert sun finally dipped beneath the horizon. The cabin smelled of pine, smoke and simmering broth by the time the Apache boy finally stirred. Caleb had settled him onto a pile of blankets near the hearth, the softest he owned, though in truth they were worn thin from years of hard use. Outside, night pressed against the log walls, coyotes yipping somewhere in the darkness. In the quiet between their calls, Caleb could hear the child's uneven breathing. By morning, the boy's eyes opened fully, sharp and wary. He didn't speak a word, only watched. Caleb, with the guarded intensity of someone who had learned early how dangerous strangers could be. "You're awake," Caleb said gently as he ladled warm broth into a tin cup. He crouched down and held it out, keeping a respectful distance. "It ain't much, but it'll help." The boy sniffed the air, then the cup, as if testing for danger. Only when his hunger overwhelmed his caution did he take it, sipping with quick, bird-like motions. After a moment he pulled back as though expecting punishment for taking too much. Caleb offered him a soft nod instead. "You go on," he encouraged. "There's more." As the day wore on, the boy's strength returned bit by bit. Caleb tried speaking to him now and then, simple things, harmless things, but the child never replied. Not a single word. Instead, he listened, eyes tracking every movement. Caleb noticed he never turned his back, not even to drink. Trust, it seemed, was a language the boy did not yet know. On the second day, the boy wandered the cabin slowly, touching objects with hesitant fingers. Caleb's old compass, a chipped mug, a smooth stone he used for sharpening his knife. But he never touched the rifle hanging on the wall. He gave that wide berth, gaze dropping when he passed it. That afternoon, Caleb found him standing outside in the sunlight, clutching the carved eagle charm at his neck. The polished wood caught the light, its wings worn smooth by years of small hands. Caleb crouched beside him. "Your family gave you that?" he asked. The boy didn't answer with words, but he nodded once, small and solemn. By the third day, a faint smile flickered across his face when Caleb handed him bread. Barely there, but real. And for the first time, Caleb felt something shift between them. a fragile, cautious thread of trust. But on the fourth morning, just as dawn spilled its first pale light across the desert floor, Caleb woke to find the blankets empty. The boy was gone. Caleb spent most of that day combing the land around his homestead, circling the mesquite thickets, checking the creek bed, calling into the empty desert air. The boy's tracks were faint, barely impressions in the dry earth, and they vanished completely among the rocks. Caleb cursed softly under his breath. He wasn't angry at the child, just worried. A boy that small, still recovering, wandering alone in Apache territory. The desert would swallow him whole before noon. By sundown, there was nothing more he could do. Exhausted, dusty, and uneasy in his own home, Caleb returned to the cabin. The silence inside felt different now, hollow, as though a small spirit had slipped out and taken some warmth with it. He lit a lantern, the flame trembling in the draught, and set it on the table. Maybe the boy had simply gone home. Maybe his people had found him. Caleb hoped so. He had just begun to unlace his boots when a sharp, deliberate knock struck the cabin door. Caleb froze. Visitors were rare. Visitors after dark were almost never friendly. The knock came again, 3 firm raps, slow and certain. Caleb stepped quietly to the wall, lifted the rifle from its hooks, and held it low, out of sight but ready. He didn't open the door at once. Instead, he called out, "Who's there?" No answer, only the whisper of wind across the desert. Another knock, this time softer, almost patient. Caleb exhaled through his nose, bracing himself, and unlatched the door. The lantern light spilled out onto 3 figures, standing silently on his porch. 3 Apache women. Their faces were grave but calm, lined with dust and travel. Each wore long woven dresses beneath patterned blankets. Moonlight glinted off the bone ornaments braided into their hair. Caleb's grip on the rifle loosened a fraction. Behind the tallest woman, half hidden by her skirt, stood the boy. He looked healthier already, cleaner, steadier on his feet, and when his eyes met Caleb's, there was no fear this time, only recognition. The eldest woman stepped forward. Her gaze was steady, neither hostile nor pleading, simply resolute. When she spoke, her English was accented but clear. "You found our son," she said. "You kept him alive." Caleb swallowed, unsure how to respond. I just did what any man would do." "No," she corrected quietly. "Not any man." There was no accusation in her tone, only truth. She lowered her head, not a bow, but a gesture of respect, offered without hesitation. And for the first time since the knock on the door, Caleb's heartbeat began to slow. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The desert night pressed close around the cabin, the air still and cool. Caleb slowly set his rifle against the wall, carefully, deliberately, so the women could see his empty hands. The eldest woman's shoulders eased just slightly. The boy stepped forward then, light-footed as a fawn. He moved to Caleb's side without hesitation and touched his hand. A small gesture, but it sent a surprising warmth through Caleb's chest. The boy pointed toward the cabin interior, at the blankets near the hearth, at the bowl Caleb had left out in case the child returned. The second woman, younger and round-faced, murmured something in Apache to the elder. Her voice trembled with emotion, and Caleb realized she must be the boy's mother. She stepped close and rested her hand briefly on her son's head. Gratitude shone in her eyes, wordless but powerful. The eldest woman opened a leather satchel at her side and withdrew a folded bundle. She held it with both hands, as though it were something sacred. "For you," she said. Caleb unfolded it carefully. It was a blanket, hand-woven, rich with desert reds, ochres, and deep midnight blues. The patterns were intricate, diamonds, arrow paths, and spiraling circles. The craftsmanship was finer than anything he'd owned in his life. I can't take this," Caleb said, though his voice lacked conviction. The eldest woman shook her head. "You gave him warmth when we could not find him. Now we give warmth to you." Another gift followed, a bone-handled knife, polished to a soft sheen. The blade was sharp, the handle carved with small eagle feathers that echoed the charm around the boy's neck. "This knife," the woman said, "belongs to a man who protects life, not takes it." Caleb felt heat rise behind his eyes. "I didn't do anything special," he murmured. He was just a child. Just a child, the woman agreed, and many would have left him. The third woman stepped forward then, older with deep-set eyes. She placed a small leather pouch of herbs in his palm. The scent of sage and wild mint drifted out. For healing, she said simply. Finally, the boy threw his arms around Caleb's waist. It was abrupt, fierce, and sincere. When he stepped back, he looked up and spoke his first English word to Caleb, soft but sure. Friend. The three women, with their son walking between them, turned and melted back into the moonlit desert. They did not rush. They did not look back. They walked as those confident in their path. Caleb stood in the doorway long after their figures vanished into shadow, the gifts heavy in his arms and his heart heavier still. A single act of kindness, he realized, had bridged worlds that had long been divided by fear, and he would never forget it.